Across Africa today, the headlines are louder than ever. Chinese surveillance towers rise, mining contracts are questioned, and Western analysts whisper, is Africa walking into Beijing's shadow? But here's the catch. While some believe Africa is simply swapping Paris for Beijing, Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso is breaking that script wide open. Because he says it straight. No new masters, not France, not America, and certainly not China. And that statement shook the room. It wasn't diplomacy, it was defiance. A line drawn for the entire continent. Now, before we go deeper, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from right now? And what do you notice most in your daily life? Dependence or independence? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your own experience matters in this conversation. This is Africa Daily Good News, your window into Africa's fight for sovereignty and survival, delivered straight, sharp, and human. The way news should be. And to our American audience tuning in, you know struggle, you know resilience. So here's Africa's story, raw and unfiltered. So let's get into it. The story doesn't start in Washington or in Beijing. It starts right here in Ouagadougou. It is not every day that an African president stands in front of the world and tells a superpower, we will not be watched. Yet that is exactly what just happened. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré is raising alarms about Chinese surveillance technology spreading across Africa, and the contradiction is striking. For years, African leaders complained about Western spies and Western exploitation, but now the same nations risk handing their data, their streets, and their people's daily movements to Beijing. That is the paradox Africa is living right now, and Traoré chose to call it out. According to Bloomberg and other outlets, Chinese safe city projects have quietly entered capitals from Nairobi to Abuja. Servers, cameras, and tracking systems are marketed as tools for security and development, but in reality they create dependence on foreign hardware and foreign monitoring. Here comes the subtle twist. What is sold as safety can also become control, and control is the very thing Africa has fought against for centuries. And think about this in human terms. Most Americans lock their doors at night not just for safety but for peace of mind. If those same locks were built, managed, and even opened by a stranger in another country, would that feel secure? Traoré uses the same logic. He says Burkina Faso cannot outsource its security to an outsider and still call it sovereignty. After all, sovereignty is not just about borders on a map. It is about who owns the eyes and ears in your streets. A short story proves the point. In Ouagadougou last year, a neighborhood discovered that their local CCTV feeds were being routed to servers outside of Africa. Parents wondered why footage of their children walking to school had to pass through foreign hands. That one discovery turned an entire district against the so-called modernization project. It is not abstract, it is personal. And once people feel that loss of privacy, they rarely return to blind trust. Maybe this explains why Traoré is gaining traction with young Africans. They are asking themselves, is technology building freedom, or is it building new chains? It is a question that resonates far beyond Burkina Faso. In fact, surveys in the United States show most Americans already distrust foreign-made apps and devices that collect personal data. The habit of suspicion is universal. When humans sense they are being watched, they act differently, less free, more restrained. So when Traoré warns that Chinese technology is becoming digital colonialism, he is not exaggerating. He is pointing out a behavior pattern everyone understands. Dependency begins quietly, then suddenly feels irreversible. The fear is that Africa will look back 10 years from now and realize its choices today traded one form of control for another. And that sets the stage for something even bigger. If security itself can be compromised by foreign influence, then what about the very resources beneath the soil? That question leads us directly to the next part of the story. It sounds unbelievable, but Africa is sitting on some of the richest mineral reserves in the world, and yet millions still live without electricity, running water, or stable jobs. The contradiction is glaring. Gold, uranium, and lithium flow out of Burkina Faso, while poverty stays behind. That's the crisis Ibrahim Traoré is confronting head-on. According to the IMF and international watchdogs, African states are now pushing to rewrite mining and oil contracts. For decades, foreign companies locked in agreements that handed them the lion's share of profits while leaving local economies with scraps. And here's the hidden twist. The numbers look clean on paper, but on the ground entire communities remain untouched by development. It's as if Africa exports wealth and imports despair. Traoré refuses to accept that equation. He told his people bluntly, "Our resources will not leave unless our children eat first." In other words, Burkina Faso's minerals are no longer just commodities. They are bargaining chips for survival. This resonates deeply because most people, whether in Africa or in America, know the frustration of watching outsiders profit while locals struggle. Americans often talk about jobs being shipped overseas. In West Africa, the complaint is even sharper. The land itself is being shipped out. Think of it in human terms. Before, villagers in Burkina Faso watched trucks loaded with gold pass by their homes without leaving a single paved road or clinic behind. After Traoré's stance, the expectation changes. Those same villagers now demand schools, hospitals, and infrastructure in exchange for every ounce of metal leaving their soil. It's the before and after that defines whether sovereignty is symbolic or real. A short story illustrates the shift. In the mining town of Houndé, locals recall how a foreign company promised jobs but hired only a handful of residents. The rest were left watching heavy machinery dig into their own land. Anger built up until community leaders demanded a renegotiation. Traoré amplified their voices on a national stage, and suddenly, what was once a local grievance became a continental debate. That transformation, personal pain turning into political power, is exactly what many young Africans now see as their future. And here's a question worth asking quietly. If Americans can debate whether Wall Street serves Main Street, shouldn't Africans question whether foreign mining serves their villages? It's not about ideology, it's about fairness. According to surveys, when people believe the system is rigged, they stop participating. And if they stop participating, nations fracture. This is why Traoré frames resource contracts not as technical paperwork, but as the foundation of Africa's sovereignty. He knows dependency is built contract by contract, signature by signature. Break the pattern, and you change the destiny. But that leads us to something even more complex. If Africa is no longer willing to be trapped in unfair deals, how does it navigate the dangerous rivalry between the West and China? That's the next battlefield waiting just ahead. The strangest irony is this. Africa is told it must choose between Washington and Beijing, as if the continent were a pawn on someone else's chessboard. That framing alone is the trap. Reports from Carnegie and AIB Insights show analysts calling Africa caught in the rivalry, a theater for great power competition. But here is the twist. Ibrahim Traoré rejects the script altogether. His words are sharp. Africa does not choose sides. Africa chooses Africa. This statement matters because it flips the psychology. Before, many African leaders survived by aligning with one camp, playing East against West. After Traoré, the idea emerges that survival comes from self-alignment, standing firm without permission. And human beings recognize this dynamic. Americans often complain about having to pick between two parties they don't trust, Democrats or Republicans, when in reality they want independence from both. Africa's dilemma is larger but eerily similar. Many hooks appear the more you look. The United States frames Africa as a partner against China. China frames Africa as a partner against the West. And yet both quietly assume Africa itself has no option to stand alone. The silent twist comes when Burkina Faso and its Sahel allies say no. Not to the partnership itself, but to the assumption that they cannot walk forward on their own feet. A short story illustrates this rebellion. At a university in Ouagadougou, students debated whether Burkina Faso should deepen ties with Beijing or Washington. One young man stood and said, "We are not orphans. We don't need adoption. We need opportunity." The room fell silent. That single remark captured the generational mood, fatigue with dependency, hunger for dignity. And here is a subtle question for you watching. If your own community was told to choose between two landlords, would you not ask instead, why can't we own the house? Most Americans would. According to surveys, people are most satisfied not when they feel dependent on options, but when they feel in control of their own choice. That logic is universal, whether in the suburbs of Ohio or the villages of Burkina Faso. Traoré uses this reasoning to fuel Africa's sovereignty. He insists Africa will not be dragged into someone else's Cold War. And maybe that is why his rhetoric travels, because it speaks to a basic human instinct, the desire to decide for yourself. But this defiance does not end with politics. The same question echoes in Africa's economy, in energy, in the push for a green future. If sovereignty is real, it must be visible not only in speeches but in the power that lights up homes. That is where the story now turns. And as we move forward, take a moment. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe nations can truly stand outside global rivalries, or does power always force aside? Your voice adds depth to this conversation. The paradox could not be sharper. Africa is one of the sunniest continents on Earth, yet millions of homes still go dark when the sun sets. That is the contradiction The Guardian highlighted when it reported on Africa's potential trillion-dollar green boom. And it is the contradiction that Ibrahim Traoré seizes on when he speaks about sovereignty. Energy, he argues, is not a luxury. It is survival. Across Africa, governments are negotiating massive solar and renewable projects. Investors call it opportunity. Environmentalists call it progress. But the hidden twist is this. Without control, even green energy can become another dependency. Panels built abroad, grids financed abroad, profits flowing abroad. It risks repeating the same story that gold and oil once told. Traoré frames the choice differently. For him, a solar panel installed by Africans, maintained by Africans, is worth more than an entire foreign-financed power plant. Before, villagers accepted that darkness was normal after sunset. After, they begin to imagine switching on a light bulb without waiting for a foreign donor's approval. That shift, from resignation to expectation, is where sovereignty becomes tangible. Mini hooks are everywhere. Analysts describe Africa as the world's green frontier. But ask yourself quietly, a frontier for whom? For Africans to finally power their schools and hospitals, or for foreign investors to lock in another century of contracts? The irony bites because people know the feeling. In the United States, homeowners who install solar panels often describe the same psychological relief: independence from the grid, freedom from monthly bills. If energy creates freedom in Ohio, why would it not create freedom in Ouagadougou? A short story makes it real. In a village near Koudougou, a community once lit its nights with kerosene lamps. Children coughed from the fumes, and parents rationed light as if it were food. Then a small solar microgrid arrived, built with local labor. Suddenly, children studied at night, shops stayed open longer, and the community's rhythm changed. What seemed like a simple bulb became a symbol of dignity. Stories like this explain why Traoré insists, energy is freedom, dependency is chains. The deeper twist is emotional. Humans, if they can control the switch to their own light, feel more alive, more secure, more capable. When they cannot, they shrink. Traoré understands that this psychological shift is as valuable as the electricity itself. It prepares people to expect more, to demand more, to refuse less. And yet, even as Burkina Faso and its neighbors dream of green independence, another stage is being set. It is not only about energy or contracts, it is about the grand theater of diplomacy, the red carpets, the handshakes, and the forums where Africa is invited to smile but rarely to speak. That is where the next tension rises. The image looks glamorous, red carpets rolled out, banners with golden letters, leaders smiling for the cameras. That is what the China-Africa Forum, known as FOCAC, often looks like on television. But behind the flashbulbs lies a question few dare to ask: who writes the script and who just plays the role? At FOCAC, Beijing promises billions in loans, projects, and partnerships. News outlets highlight pledges for infrastructure and development. Yet here is the twist hidden in plain sight. Every promise is tied to conditions. Every handshake comes with strings. What seems like generosity can become leverage, and once leverage is gained, it is rarely surrendered. Traoré has watched this theater and refused to clap on cue. He has said openly that no forum, no banquet, no handshake can define Africa's destiny. Before, leaders often returned from summits with agreements they barely understood but felt pressured to accept. After Traoré, the tone changes. Now the message is simple. Sovereignty is not negotiated in hotel ballrooms. Human beings recognize the pattern. In the United States, most people know the feeling of a sales pitch that sounds too good to be true, a free trial, a special discount, until the hidden fees appear later. FOCAC for many Africans feels the same. The stage is polished, the speech is sweet, but the cost shows up years down the road. And when nations realize the debt, it is too late to walk away clean. A short story brings this to life. A Burkina Faso official once described returning from an international forum with a suitcase full of glossy brochures and promises of cooperation. Months later, the only thing that materialized was a binding loan contract with interest rates higher than expected. The brochures gathered dust, while the debt remained. That memory now fuels Traoré's caution. He does not oppose dialogue, but he insists that true partnerships must be forged in villages and factories, not in banquets designed for photographers. The deeper twist here is psychological. Humans, if they can see beyond the glitter, often act more wisely. But if they are dazzled by spectacle, they surrender without knowing it. Traoré's defiance is not only political, it is a lesson in human behavior. Dependency rarely begins with force. It begins with applause. And so, while the lights of international forums shine brightly, a different light is rising across the Sahel. It is not staged, not choreographed, but born from contracts being torn up and rewritten. That quiet defiance is where the story now turns. The most unexpected reversal is happening quietly. Instead of waiting for foreign powers to dictate their future, Sahel nations are rewriting the rules together. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, once described as fragile, are now acting as a bloc, tearing up contracts and demanding new terms. The paradox is striking. The weakest on paper are becoming the strongest in defiance. News reports confirm that these governments are canceling deals signed under pressure and drafting fresh agreements that keep more profits at home. For outside observers, it looks reckless, but here's the twist. What appears risky from Washington or Paris looks like survival in Ouagadougou. Dependency has already proven deadly. Autonomy, no matter how fragile, feels safer. Traoré leans into this transformation. He calls it not isolation, but liberation. Before, each country fought alone, negotiating with powers far larger than themselves. After, they present a united front, turning small voices into a chorus. Human beings instinctively know the power of collective action. In America, workers form unions when they feel exploited. In West Africa, states are forming alliances for the same reason. Many hooks surface in the psychology. Analysts frame the Sahel alliance as unstable because it resists traditional diplomacy. Yet on the ground, citizens frame it as finally stable because their governments are listening inward, not outward. It's the twist that outsiders rarely admit. What looks like chaos abroad can feel like order at home. A short story captures it. In a border village near Kaya, families used to hear distant gunfire and wonder if their government had any control left. When the announcement came that 40,000 troops would be stationed along the frontier, people felt something shift. A farmer said simply, "For the first time, I believe the border belongs to us." That statement, quiet and ordinary, reveals why sovereignty matters. It is not a theory. It is the difference between fear and dignity. Most people understand this instinctively. According to research in behavioral science, humans feel most secure not when danger disappears, but when they see their leaders acting decisively against it. Americans know this too. After disasters, people do not expect miracles. They expect visible effort. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's visible effort is rewriting contracts and placing troops where once there was only absence. And so the journey comes full circle. Africa is no longer defined by what outsiders give, but by what its own leaders demand. The Sahel Alliance may stumble, it may struggle, but its direction is clear. Sovereignty first, negotiation second. That is why Ibrahim Traoré's message resonates beyond Burkina Faso. It speaks to the universal human desire to own your fate. And as the dust settles on this chapter, one image lingers. A continent once seen as a prize, now stepping forward as a player. The stage is still crowded with powerful actors, but Africa is no longer an audience. It has stepped into the spotlight, and the world is watching what comes next. The closing irony is this. The world still talks about Africa as if it were a chessboard, yet the pieces are no longer waiting to be moved. Nations like Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, are moving themselves, and that simple act disrupts the entire game. Analysts call it dangerous, others call it reckless, but for Africans living through it, the word is survival. Across global headlines from Washington to Beijing, Africa is described as contested territory. But here comes the quiet twist. What outsiders frame as conflict, insiders frame as clarity. For the first time in decades, leaders are speaking without permission. Before, the expectation was silence in exchange for aid. After, the expectation is dignity in exchange for nothing less than fairness. Humans everywhere recognize this shift. In America, when workers refuse unpaid overtime, they are not destabilizing the company, they are restoring balance. The same principle holds when Burkina Faso refuses lopsided contracts. A small story reveals the scale. In Ouagadougou, an elderly shopkeeper remembers when officials bowed to visiting delegations, promising compliance in return for crumbs. He says the bowing has stopped. Now, he adds, they shake hands standing tall. That image carries weight because it shows change not in theory but in posture, before bent, after upright. And maybe this is the heart of Africa's sovereignty. Confrontation is not its essence. Confidence is. According to studies on social behavior, people feel most respected not when they receive gifts but when their choices are honored. Most Americans would agree, respect is worth more than charity. Africa's leaders are beginning to insist on the same rule, so the mood rises from doubt to defiance, from hesitation to hope. The story that began with surveillance cameras and hidden contracts ends with a continent demanding to be seen on its own terms. That is why Ibrahim Traoré matters. Not because he alone can change Africa, but because he embodies the shift millions are already living. And as the spotlight fades on this moment, one image lingers. A continent once treated as background now stepping forward, no longer quiet, no longer passive. Africa is speaking, the voice is clear, and the world cannot look away.